Welcome to the Your Next Move podcast with Kimberly Brown. And today we are going to ask a question. Are you overwhelmed or overcapacity? Now, this one needs a disclaimer. If you have ever worked with me before, if you know me in real life, I am not talking about you. I have had this conversation with multiple people who've worked with me in the workplace. So someone may be listening and be like, is Kim talking about me on that daggone podcast? No, I'm not talking about you. This is just in general because it's something that a lot of professionals face all of the time. And honestly, it's a little bit of a pet peeve for me as a leader in the workplace. There's a big difference between actually being overwhelmed and truly being over capacity in the workplace. So I want to unwind a little bit just so I can explain. So in my last 9-to-5 roles, which were more like 8 to 8, 7 to 7, not really 9 to 5. I've never really had a 9 to 5. There was so much going on. And I've been very fortunate that I've been able to build out new functions, build out teams, and build strategy. It's been such a phenomenal experience. My last few roles in corporate, I was always in an inaugural role. So I was the first person to ever have it. And I built out a team. So all of my team members also had inaugural roles, which has its own special nuances, which can be a podcast in itself. And this work can 100% be overwhelming. I joke and say in roles like this, they give you a desk, a laptop, and say, go forth into the light. The job description was a brief outline of the work that you're doing, but it's your job to really go in and make that role into something. And I want to break down the difference between overwhelmed versus overcapacity because sometimes they can feel the same when you're just stressed in the workplace. When the going gets tough, I've heard professionals say things like, I just can't do anything else. Like I cannot do another thing. I can't show up in another meeting. I can't do another deck. It is all too much. I'm over capacity. But my question is, are you? Are you over capacity? Overcapacity means that you literally can no longer take on work. If you maximize your working hours, there is literally not another moment in that day where you could do yet another thing. You have multiple projects, competing deadlines, and there's just no way to get it all done, period. You are literally over capacity where your working cup is overflowing. But overwhelmed is a lot different. Technically speaking, overwhelmed is a feeling because there's a lot of things on your plate. Your emotional state is then impacted because it seems like there's just so much to do, but sometimes there may not be. It's just the feeling of being overwhelmed, which generally comes from disorganization or not maximizing time or not understanding competing priorities. When this new information is coming at you, deadlines are unclear, deliverables are flexible, it's really hard to decipher from being overwhelmed or being over capacity. Overwhelmed can be fixed. 100%. I've sat down with team members when we've had this conversation and been like, okay, we need to list out everything that you are working on. What are the deadlines for everything that you are working on? Are these deadlines doable? What are the steps you need to take? Let's break this down into bite-sized pieces so you no longer feel like you're overwhelmed. It really is focusing on how do we create a plan for you to execute at your highest level. But overcapacity is a much deeper conversation because you need to better understand what needs to happen in the organization and what may happen if you're unable to do some of this work. And this conversation may be really hard to hear, but this is something that leaders have to do all the time. Being overwhelmed can't stop action when you're a leader in the workplace. I recall one of my direct reports coming to me one time, and it was a really tough conversation where they came and said, hey, I'm over capacity. I can't do yet another thing. It is not an option for me to do it. I just can't take it off my plate. I can't do it. Can't meet the deadline. And they looked at me and I was like, okay. And then they followed up and said, well, is the deadline moving back? Like, who's going to do it? And I was like, I have to do it. And they're like, well, I'm not trying to give you more work. And I'm like, yes, but if you are truly over capacity and you cannot complete this work, that does not stop the larger project, our team, the initiative. I have to then do that work. And that's part of being a leader. And I know this can lead us down a windy road of talking about toxic workplaces and demanding bosses and you needing time off and this, but I'm not talking about times when you are sick or you have mental health that you're dealing with, mental health issues that you're dealing with, like anxiety, depression. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about your day-to-day experience. And if you are overwhelmed or overcapacity, overwhelmed because you have so much happening, or are you overcapacity because there's literally not enough hours in the day to get the work done, even if you maximize your time. And with that employee, they were absolutely positively shocked that was what I had to do, was pick up the work on my own, even though my plate and my cup had already run over. And as leaders, that's just what we have to be able to do. And sometimes being over capacity or overwhelmed may not necessarily matter, because we've still got to get the work done. As a professional, I want to encourage you to truly evaluate. If you feel like you may be overwhelmed or over capacity, I want you to evaluate, which one is it? Before you come to your manager, before you stop the project, before you log offline and go grab a cocktail because you just can't do another thing, I want you to evaluate, are you overwhelmed? And again, that's more unclear deadlines, competing priorities. You just don't know what's happening and you need to create a plan. Can you do that for yourself before you go to your manager? Or are you over capacity where you physically, mentally cannot do? If you maximize all your time, you literally cannot get the work done. And that is a deeper conversation with your manager to advocate for yourself and make sure that you can be put in a position where you're able to execute at the highest level in a way that you feel is meaningful and you are excited about, that does not impact your work quality. And last but not least, we have to kind of dig back again and talk about advocating for yourself, because in any of these situations, yes, it's one thing to know that this is where you are, but this also brings up when it's appropriate to have this conversation. And that if you feel either of these things, it's not to you to just sit by yourself and just know that this isn't great, go to happy hour, talk with your friends. This is the time to be empowered to have a conversation with whoever your manager or leader is. But like I tell all of my direct reports, I like folks who come to me with solutions, not just problems. So think about what your plan of action could be. In an ideal world, how would you like to address being over capacity or overwhelmed, and share with your boss and figure out what could be your next step. How could you put a plan together that achieves the goals of the organization and your boss, while also prioritizing your own well-being in the workplace? If you have questions, let me know. And with that, may your next move be your very best move. Have a great day. I didn't have a choice in doing these things. No matter how much I wanted to relax, I felt like I still had to keep moving. Some people may call that striving. But for me, it's like I just knew the vision that I have for my life is so much larger than where I am today. And I need to get up and continue to move and groove.